What's going on, everyone? Welcome into this special edition of the Locked On Crossover Podcast. I'm the host of Locked On Louisville, Dalton Pence. With me, host of Locked On Pitt, Nick Faribault. Nick, how's it going, man?
It's going extremely well, Dalton. Listen, it's a good matchup coming out here between Pitt and Louisville. Pitt goes on the road. Louisville gets Malik Cunningham back. A lot of storylines in this one, and I think what's a must-win for both teams.
I definitely agree. Before we get into that, just a reminder, today's episode brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline, where the game starts. The Louisville Cardinals, the Pittsburgh Panthers taking on each other at Cardinal Stadium this Saturday. Homecoming weekend for the Louisville Cardinals. As Nick mentioned, it is a must-win game for different reasons for both programs. We're going to dive into the rationales behind that. We'll talk about the key matchups, and then we'll get into a little fun segment, talk about some predictions, what to watch for, so on and so forth. Yeah, let's get right on into it, Nick. Like you mentioned before the show, I don't really know why I didn't put two and two together because I think that, Pittsburgh is still in the hunt somewhat for, the ACC Coastal Division. Louisville, it's a little bit of a different situation, but we both have come to the conclusion early on that the main storylines for both teams is, look, both teams need a win. Unfortunately, one team can only come out victorious. So, in your opinion, for Pat Narduzzi's squad, why is this such a critical game for the Panthers?
Well, it looks like the Coastal's wide open. Like there is no one that has come up and stepped up to take the Coastal. Now, you can argue all about North Carolina with their big win over Duke. Maybe they're the front runners. Maybe it's even Georgia Tech if you're into that and their resurgence after Jeff Sims was, got hot and they fired Jeff Collins. It can be a question. You can put Duke in there. You can put Pitt in there still, and that's why this is a must-win game for Pitt. Pitt's in this thing. They had a really bad loss to Georgia Tech that should have never happened. That was very obvious. But they came back the next week and they stomped Virginia Tech, and they did it so dominantly on the ground. And that was something that kind of creeped back up because remember, this is a Pitt team that took what is now going to be a top 5 Tennessee team to overtime. This is a Pitt team that has showcased the ability to do a lot of good things this year. And so it really, if you look at Pitt's schedule, if they play to what they can do, they could probably run the table. And that's what I think most Pitt fans are probably hoping they can do here. Go 10-2, and then the loss to Georgia Tech is a much, much distant memory. And that's why this is a must-win game too. Because honestly, you look at their schedule from here on out. The easiest game is probably Virginia left. There's not a lot of easy games. Miami looks a lot easier than it did obviously at the beginning of the year, but UNC next week is going to be a tough matchup. Then it's Syracuse after that. That's not going to be easy. Syracuse is a ranked team, undefeated right now. We'll see how real they are against Clemson this week, but that's going to be a tough game. It doesn't have a tough schedule, but they have games where everything's a toss up. And this is another one of those. They're going on the road for the first time since going to Western Michigan all the way back on September 18th. So this is a long time coming for Pitt to finally get back on the road, but they're healthy now. And Pitt had to come out of that bye week. They had to work out a lot of issues that they were having after really the first 2 games. It appeared like they were starting to really hit their stride. And then Keaton Slovis got hurt and everything kind of went awry. So really, this is a must-win game because Pitt, quite honestly, has position in the Coastal to do what they want to do if they want it. It's not a terrifically hard schedule, and they have the talent to beat just about everyone left on that schedule. But Dalton, I know for Louisville on the other side, it's a little bit of a must-win game, I think, for a different type of reason. Malik Cunningham is back. That's obviously a huge story in this one. So the Cardinals will have their star quarterback back, but they got to win this one because of Scott Satterfield.
Yeah, it's crazy to think of how polarizingly different the rationales are behind claiming that both teams need to win this game. And like you said, for Pittsburgh, it's aspirations toward trying to get back to the ACC championship game. For Louisville, simply put, it's Scott Satterfield coaching for his job. Um, Granted, The bowl eligibility is still obtainable. The Cardinals didn't really do themselves many favors early on in the season. They went 3-3 through the first 6 games, probably a stretch of the year where they probably needed to go 4-2 at the very worst, because you've got Clemson, you have Wake Forest, NC State. Sure, Devin Leary is no longer going to be playing this year with his injury. But still, I mean, NC State is a formidable opponent. You have Kentucky as well. And then Pittsburgh and James Madison are no slouches. Both teams have spent some parts of this season ranked. So the second half of the season was extremely more difficult than the first half. And you talk about 2 toss-up losses against Boston College, which was the most disappointing loss in Satterfield's tenure so far. You should have won the game against Florida State. Syracuse, you can make the case that it is what it is, because currently, I mean, they're 6-0, and they look pretty decent. Who would have thought? But yeah, I mean, I think that this is a must-win game for Satterfield, because if you lose this game, the pathway to bowl eligibility becomes that much more difficult. It's a lot easier. It's not easy, but it's a lot easier to beat Pittsburgh, James Madison, and then try to upset one of the 4 ranked teams you have to play, than lose to Pittsburgh, or maybe even lose to James Madison and have to upset 2 of those teams. So impossible? No. Improbable? Yes, for sure. So to answer your question, it's all about job security for Scott Satterfield. And, Louisville is fighting, but this game against Pittsburgh is really going to set the tone moving forward for the rest of the season. So with a loss, it seems like all hope is kind of lost. But even if you win, it's like, okay, you still have work to do. But Pittsburgh is the first step in trying to inch your way closer to 6 wins.
Yeah, and I feel like for Pitt, it's a very similar way in a different way. If they lose this
Yeah.
game, getting to the ACC championship feels like a long cry, and they could still do it. Obviously, even if they're 2 losses, the Coastal does feel open enough to where if they have 2 losses on their resume, they could make it at 9-3, but they could not slip up again after that, and that would be the hard part. And going right to Chapel Hill the week after, I mean, that's the big game for Pitt, and I think that
Mhm.
might be a storyline here for Pitt is coming off a bye. They're going to be fresher, but the mind is going to be in Chapel Hill next week because let's be real, that's gonna probably if Pitt wins this game, that's a big if. Pitt has to win this one first. That could decide the Coastal next week. That could decide who comes out of the ACC Coastal and goes to Charlotte. And so I think Pitt, in a similar vein, has to win this one because it feels like if they lose this one or overlook this one and fall to 4-3, that everything kind of just goes off to the side, and Pitt is going to be much worse off for it in the standings. And at that point, you're just fighting for a higher bowl standing rather than anything.
In this matchup particularly, you and I talked, I want to say it was like late July when we discussed this matchup when we had a crossover podcast. Going back to how you felt about this matchup back then, I know you and I were both kind of circling it as one of those like, okay, both of these teams could come in a very interesting situation. Obviously, they are interesting situations, for better or for worse. How do you feel about this matchup now on October, what is it, 20th, versus how you did back in July?
I feel very similar ways. I thought that both these teams would be a little better. I think it kind of came into the expectation you were thinking they'd be 5-1.
Right.
I think Louisville, you were thinking maybe they'd be 4-2, 5-1 because they had the veteran presence of Malik Cunningham, and it felt like this is kind of the year if Scott Satterfield's going to get it done. That they're
Mhm.
going to churn that wheel and go forward. So you thought maybe this could be a potential matchup like the 2021 was, where these 2 teams were ranked last time they met. So you thought maybe that was possible. Neither of the teams are going to end up ranked, obviously here, but it's a toss-up matchup. I mean, on BetOnline this week, this opened as a straight pick'em. It's now
Mhm.
moved a little bit towards Louisville. I think now that Malik Cunningham is clearly going to probably suit up in this one and play. But that's how close these teams are right now. So this one
Right.
is about as toss-up as you can. It was the only straight pick'em on that BetOnline spreadsheet that I looked at all this week. So these 2 teams are about as evenly matched as you could find right now in the country coming into this one in the eyes of Vegas. And I think that means a lot in terms of how we look at this game because there's going to be so many different scenarios I think that we can run through that could really teeter either way. You can see a
Right.
Louisville blowout happening, you see a Pitt blowout happening, or you could see in the middle, which I think ends up happening. And this one's going to be a close one down to the very end. But I think that's the intrigue of this match. It's such a close game between two teams in similar positions in a lot of ways, but for different reasons.
Yeah, and that's a perfect segue into the next thing I want to talk about, and that's kind of looking at those key matchups because, like you mentioned, it's seemingly very even. From a Vegas standpoint, usually Vegas doesn't really deviate far from what ends up happening, but I think it could come down to a couple key battles in terms of what ends up deciding this game in particular. We're going to talk about some of those here in just a second after we talk about our friends over at SweatBlock. Look, I am a big recreational basketball player. I missed my calling for the NBA along with my lack of height. Only being 5'10", it's a little tough, but regardless, with me getting older, kind of getting out of my prime at 24 now, so I'm sweating a lot more. So my usual deodorant was something that I wasn't necessarily too awful satisfied with. So when I switched to SweatBlock, the results spoke for themselves. It has been a game changer both on the court and afterwards as well in the car on the car ride home. So definitely check out SweatBlock. It was created by a doctor to help with his own excessive sweating. It is a doctor created and doctor recommended product. If you or someone you love is experiencing embarrassing sweat or odor, try SweatBlock. Save 20% with the promo code Locked On. That is 2 words, Locked On, at sweatblock.com. Also available on Amazon. So you're listening or watching, depending on what your medium that you're using, to a special Locked Over crossover podcast between two ACC podcasts, Locked On Louisville. I'm Dalton Pence. That's the host of Locked On Pitt, Nick Faribault. Nick, we're looking at the key matchups when it comes to this particular game. I know that there's one for the Pittsburgh offense that you're definitely looking at for Pat Narduzzi's offense. Why don't you go ahead and tell the viewers about what you're looking at in particular?
Yeah, I think obviously the Pitt run game is the highlight of this team. I mean, this is the reason why Pitt has been able to win a lot of games, keep a lot of games close. It has been consistently good. Now they don't rank super high in terms of gross yardage or anything like that, but they are a grounded pound, stick it to them type of team, and we know what Israel Abanikanda can do. Arguably, has been the best back in the ACC this year. Everyone saw what he did against Virginia Tech, 320 yards, breaking Tony Dorsett's record, 6 touchdowns in that game. He is truly one of the most dynamic runners, not just in the ACC, in the country. He has a gear that most guys are not going to have. Former track athlete and state winning champion, actually, in New York. So he is a special athlete. But there's also going to be another wrinkle in this one. Rodney Hammond's going to be back, and that's Pitt's number 2 running back. But when him and Abanikanda are both healthy, they like to get both of them in because Hammond's a little bit of a different type of style. He's small and you wouldn't expect it, but he's a hard-hitting guy. He's very quick on his feet. If you're a Pitt fan, I think a lot of people have already drawn this comparison. It reminds you a lot of Dion Lewis from back in the day. Quick cuts, hard hitter, grinding out the yards. He will be a tough matchup. Coming back now, has missed every game since West Virginia when he got hurt in that one. He was tearing up the Mountaineers on the ground, where Pitt really couldn't find much success outside of him in that one because they just keyed in on Israel Abanikanda that day. But Hammond was the one that kind of took the hammer to the nail and really lodged it in. And that's, I think, what Pitt's going to try and do here is use that 1-2 punch and go into this front of Louisville that is much improved, that is proving to be very stout, and they're going to try and run the football because that's where Pitt makes their money. So the question is going to be, can this offensive line for Pitt open up the lanes for Hammond and Abanikanda? And if they can, I think Pitt has a really good shot in this one because you see what they can do when they are running the football consistently, and that's just control the game and force teams to conform to their style. And that's what Pitt, I think, wants to do in a lot of these games. And it also opened up the passing game for Keaton Slovis over the middle of the field behind them. So I think that's a key as well to get going, try to get that passing game going a little bit off the run game. But I want to go now to Louisville because Louisville has one really key matchup that you look at. And it's really not like a receiver versus a corner, a running back versus a run defense or anything like that. It's one man versus an entire group of linebackers, defense, whatever you want. It's basically Malik Cunningham versus Pitt because you look at the leading rusher, the leading passer, basically the leader in everything for this Louisville offense. It's one man. It's Malik Cunningham. He's the big matchup to watch.
Yeah, and he's back after missing that game against Virginia. And like you said, I think the Louisville offense is tailor made to support the strengths of Malik Cunningham. But that also kind of puts a lot of responsibility on him because he's such a big factor to where if he's not having a good game, it is a direct, association with the offensive success. Like if Keaton Slovis doesn't have a good game, well, possibly the rushing attack helps that out, and maybe vice versa. Probably, maybe not necessarily so much the other way around, but regardless, any other program usually out there. I mean, if one aspect of the offense isn't really hitting or firing, then the other one may be, and that can kind of save it. But the impact that Malik Cunningham has, it's on the rushing attack, it's on the passing attack. Louisville is a predominantly kind of rush team. So they're kind of like Pittsburgh in that realm. They try to assert the run, which they've done a pretty solid job of doing. But like you said, I think that's kind of the key matchup each and every week. It's Malik Cunningham taking on the other guys across the field. Now, granted, Louisville has some very, very talented skill players, and they've got a good offensive line. But at the end of the day, because of the fact that there's a lot of RPOs in the offense, there's a lot of design quarterback runs. Malik Cunningham's success kind of dictates the offensive success as a whole. So yeah, I think you're kind of right on that. But I think another key aspect of this is going to be I think Louisville's offense, it's getting better week by week. Defensively is the issue. One thing that I'm looking forward to, Scott Satterfield said in his weekly press conference that Pittsburgh had the best offensive line that the team was going to face this season. It's a very much improved the Louisville defensive line as well, fifth in the nation in sacks entering last week. I know that's probably changed now with the bye week, but a lot of tackles for loss as well. So I'm interested to see with Pittsburgh losing their left tackle, how does that change moving forward?
Yeah, look, the thing with Carter Warren being out for the year, and that's a legitimate loss. We're not just talking about a really good college left tackle. We're talking about a guy that's going to be in the NFL next year. He'll be picked in the NFL draft. So Carter Warren's a legitimate loss for Pitt. They have been playing without him, though. They have 2 weeks now of experience without him.
Mhm.
So that is good. And they're going to get their starting center, Owen Drexel, back, who was out with a leg injury since the Tennessee game. So that will be a boon to their offensive line as well. They've been kind of moving around the offensive line a lot. They've been rotating on the offensive line, trying to figure out their best rotation. And I think they found it at this point with left tackle Branson Taylor, who's now the starter. The last 2 weeks, he's been really good. Their backup, young redshirt sophomore left tackle now, and Branson Taylor has proven himself to be quite good. Now, this is a leaky offensive line at times because, again, they rotate a lot. But Owen Drexel getting back is going to be interesting. We haven't really seen him a lot this year. He's a solid center. He's not a great center. He's a solid center, though. He'll kind of hold his own. And that's kind of going to be the question, though, of, well, what does that mean for the rest of the offensive line? Marcus Minor on the left side, left guard, is solid. Again, not super great, but solid. Then on the right side, that's going to be where you kind of wonder what happens. Jake Cradle, who's been filling at center, was the team's starting right guard. Does he take that over, or does Gabe Hoy, who was the starting right tackle, stay there? And Matt Gonsalves, who's been the starting right tackle, has played well filling in for Hoy start there. So it's kind of going to be like who starts there. We don't truly know yet. We won't know until the first snap of the game comes out. But Pitt rotates on their offensive line. So you're probably going to see more guys coming in. You're going to see multiple guys at right guard and right tackle. It's a good offensive line. I wouldn't call it a great offensive line. There's been issues with pass protection. There's been issues with communication. I think that's been the biggest thing. Without Drexel, without their center, they haven't been sliding to the right side. They haven't been able to communicate overall. And I think that's been a massive issue for Pitt. They've been really good in the ground game. They just haven't been able to protect Keaton Slovis. And then there's also the fact that Keaton Slovis has really killed that unit a lot, running into pressure, holding onto the ball too long. So we'll kind of see how that works out. It's a good offensive line. I wouldn't call it a great offensive line. With Carter Warren, I think it's a great offensive line. But also, when you look at Louisville, Pitt has struggled in the passing game, but they do have a few good receivers, Kadani Mumfield, Jared Wayne. These guys are good receivers. The secondary for Louisville looks suspect right now, and that could be a matchup to watch if Keaton Slovis can get going.
I definitely agree there, and I think that it's just a matter of I'm looking to see if there's anything schematically that's going to change with the Louisville defense, especially in the secondary when it comes to how they're going to approach the Pittsburgh passing game. It might be a little bit of a challenge, obviously, with the Pittsburgh rushing attack. But yeah, I think that key matchups for the Cardinals. It's Malik Cunningham against the whole defense, and it's the battle in the trenches for the Louisville defensive line going up against Pittsburgh. Outside of the passing attack for Keaton Slovis and that receiving core, and the dynamic rushing attack, is there any other key matchups that you're looking at in this matchup?
Just special teams. Pitt's had, I think, rocky special teams. Some weeks it's been phenomenal. Other weeks it's been the worst in the
Louisville's the
world. They've
same
had,
way, so.
yeah, pretty much. I mean, Pitt's had 2 blocked punts this year against them. They've also blocked punts. They the kicking situation with Ben Sauls has been up and down. Recently, he's kind of found his footing. Sam Vanderhaar, their freshman punter, has also recently found his footing. Pitt finally has their returner in MJ Devonshire, who is one of their starting corners. He took a touchdown back a few weeks ago at the punt return game, but it is still up and down. It's volatile. They almost lost the game against Virginia Tech. They were up 31-16, allowed a blocked punt touchdown, and that brought Virginia Tech back into the game, but Pitt still closed the door on them. So it's something to watch. The third phase of the game always is something that we don't really talk about a lot on shows like this, but I think you have to key in on overall. But I do want to now move to predictions. Let's talk a little bit more about just the overall game, our feelings about this. But first, folks, I want to let you all know about BetOnline, betonline.net. It's your number one source for football betting info this season. And listen, this Louisville Pitt game, it's over there. Again, it's a straight pick 'em. So feel free. You don't get to pick who covers. You got to pick who wins. It's like you're betting a money line. But on this one, it's a straight pick 'em between Pitt and Louisville. You can find all the latest player developments, team matchups, news, podcasts, in-depth articles, analysis this season. And as always, BetOnline remains your continued source for all your sport wagering information with live betting and up to the moment score updates for every sport out there, including the MLB, MMA, boxing, NFL, college football, everything you could ever want. Head to BetOnline or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and the action. BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, Dalton, let's get into this. Let's talk about the game as a whole. What is the feeling for Louisville heading into this one? How do you feel coming off the bye and seeing kind of what happens?
I feel cautious to be optimistic because every turn that I've become optimistic for this team this season, I've been shown immediately why I should not be optimistic. So I think I'm cautious with this one. I ultimately think that this is going to be a tough matchup for Louisville because they over the past couple weeks, yeah, they held Virginia to 6 rushing yards, but that's not an offense that really runs the ball that much. Boston College was one of the worst rushing offenses in the country, and they made them look solid. And tackling has been an issue with the dynamic rushing attack that Pittsburgh has. I definitely think that that's going to be an issue. Now, granted, they did do something against a solid Florida State rushing attack, but at the end of the day, Louisville, for me to be confident in them, they're going to have to prove me wrong. They're going to have to win one of these 50-50 games against the team that they maybe aren't supposed to beat, or if they are supposed to beat, it's very, very close. And if it's a pick 'em, it's a 50-50 game, and the Louisville just has not been good at that consistently. So feeling coming into this game is, hey, look, if you win, that's great, but I'm not expecting too much.
Yeah, I think you look at the game overall as well. And for Pitt, it's a tough one. I think that Louisville defensively doesn't have a super weakness other than that the intermediate part of the field is a big area where a lot of teams have attacked
Mhm.
them thus far this year. And that's kind of where Keaton Slovis likes to live when he can live. And I think that's one of the things that I look at in this game, where you see Louisville's stats in the ACC defensively all really good, including rushing defense. That's 6th in the ACC, but it's only 133.8 yards per game. And NCAA, that's not too bad overall for Louisville. So they're a decent run defense. They're not a great run defense, but they get after the quarterback, as you mentioned, with all of those sacks. They average almost 4 sacks per game. That's leading the ACC right now. So that's going to be key. But I do think Pitt likes to live in that intermediate part of the field. The question is going to be, can they protect Keaton Slovis? And who's going to step up a receiver? Because Pitt just lost Jalen Bradley, rather, to the transfer portal, who was one of their receivers that was starting to step up. Now, there's a lot of drama behind the scenes there that caused that, but Pitt hasn't found their footing passing offense-wise. And when they've been at their best, second half against West Virginia, first half against Tennessee, why did they compete with Tennessee and lead them in the first half there? Was because Keaton Slovis was on fire. They were able to get explosive plays. They were able to just hit all those shot plays. So the question is going to be out of the bye week as Pitt was ready to reset. Is Keaton Slovis going to be ready to take the next step? And if he is, Pitt's offense is going to be a top 25 caliber offense. And I think that's the difference of Pitt's ascension versus Pitt just kind of wading back into the waters in this one. I think that's going to be the key thing because Pitt has struggled. Keaton Slovis has not been very good this season. Their receivers have struggled to separate and consistently catch the ball and make those tough catches when they needed to. And as a result, teams have just kind of keyed in on Jared Wayne, rather, their number one receiver, and tight end Gavin Bartholomew, which has been an issue for this Pitt passing attack. But it's all really up to Keaton Slovis and Frank Cignetti to get these things working in movement because they have not been in lockstep with one another all year. And I think that's going to be an interesting kind of battle in this game of who can kind of find their footing. Pitt kind of had to get right game where they put up 45 against Virginia Tech, but they only did that on the ground. The passing game was still really bad in that game. So is the passing game going to come around? I think that's the biggest question overall. But let's throw out predictions right now. Dalton, I'll give it to you first. What are you feeling?
Well, if you can tell by my tone, I'm going to predict a Pittsburgh victory and hope like hell I'm wrong. I don't think it's going to be a blowout. I think that the Cardinals are steadily improving each and every week, but it's the same issues. It's the same mental mistakes. It's the consistent inconsistency, I should say, and that's been the thing that has plagued the Scott Satterfield era so far. So I think that Pittsburgh wins this game. I think it has the potential to kind of be in the median area. I think 31-28 is an interesting score. I don't think that this game will be too big of a shootout. For some reason, I feel like the teams are just going. It's going to be kind of a messy game for teams trying to get their passing offense going, and the defense is really keying in on stopping the run. So I'm going to go with the Pittsburgh victory here. At the end of the day, I think that the dynamic rushing attack for the Panthers is going to be just a little bit too much with the passing attack just kind of being in a bad spot. I think that Keaton Slovis might have his get right game, so to speak. So I'm going to go with the Pittsburgh victory here. I think it could go either way, though. It's going to depend on depending on turnovers and things of that nature, and also penalties as well. Two things that have kind of been here and there for Louisville. So.
Yeah, and that's going to be the big thing for Pitt. What in the world do they get from Keaton Slovis? I don't know if they can win just off of Israel Abanikanda and Rodney Hammond. I think that's obviously a massive part of the key to victory in any game they play is these two guys going. But you're telling me that you're going to beat Louisville the same way you can beat Virginia Tech? I'm not really buying it. Virginia Tech's probably the worst team in the ACC. At least it's either them or Virginia right now. You're not so the Pitt's beaten Western Michigan by running the football really well, Rhode Island by running the football really well, and Virginia Tech. And they tried to do it against Georgia Tech, and they didn't do it. And that's the thing that I look at here. It's going to be put up or shut up time for Keaton Slovis. And he's going to have to step up. These receivers are going to have to step up. This whole offense for Pitt in that passing game is going to have to step up. And we're going to see if they have the get right game. If we see the same offense that came out in that second half against West Virginia and powered them to victory, or in that first half against Tennessee and put them in that position to win that game, That's going to be the difference. And Pitt's defense also needs a bounce back game after allowing almost 400 yards to Virginia Tech that had no business happening. So that's going to be something to look at too. Can Pitt's defense stay consistent enough to keep Pitt afloat in this one, say if the offense starts slow? I do think Pitt in this one matches up well against Louisville, and I think that's one thing in their favor. I think the offense is built to stop quarterbacks similar to Malik Cunningham, who has kind of the inconsistent deep passing ability every now and then. They're going to force him, I think, to do that. They're going to try and keep him in the pocket. Pitt's defensive line is still really good, which is obviously a boon for them every time they go into a stadium. I think Pitt wins this one in a pretty close battle, but I do think they win this one. I think we're going to see something like 38-28. I think that makes sense. Close. I just add the 10 points. I think maybe a late touchdown by, say, Israel Abanikanda or something. Adds to that. I think that's kind of the game we see. I think this one's going to be a close matchup, though, and I think Louisville easily can swing this game the other way because Pitt's inconsistent on both sides of the football, and it's really not the same issue each week. It's kind of a different issue each week. So I have no idea what the issue will be this week. Sometimes they're really good tacklers, sometimes they're bad tacklers. Sometimes it looks like they have a cohesive run defense, and other times they just got gaps wide open, and you're going on for 70 yards out of nowhere. Pitt has done that before against these teams where they have held them to say like 1 yard per carry throughout the whole game, and then there's just a 70-yard touchdown bust. And that's been the one thing with the defense. They haven't necessarily given up consistent 14, 15 play drives. It's the issue of, oh, there's one mental mistake, and there goes the explosive play the other way. So I think that's kind of what you got to watch for Pitt.
I definitely agree there, and I think like you mentioned, I think that the key takeaway from this is that it's probably equally as important of a game, but for different reasons, and it's is equally as matched of a equally as big of a matchup for both teams for different reasons. So I think that it's going to be a very interesting game. Like I said beforehand, you can find both of these podcasts on all streaming services to check out the Louisville side of things at Locked On the Louisville, or at LO_Louisville, I should say, is the Locked On Louisville Twitter page, on YouTube as well, WHAS 11 Plus in the local stratosphere. Nick, do us a favor. Plug us into your social media. It seems like you write for about 12 different places. Where can we find your work? Where can we find Locked On Pitt?
Yeah, you can read Pitt and Steelers stuff at Pittsburgh Sports Now. Make sure to check that stuff out. Obviously, head over to Locked On Pitt to listen to the Locked On Pitt podcast all week. I'll be giving info out there. Follow me at Nick_Faribaugh, talking about this game all week as well. So make sure to listen to Locked On Pitt. Again, I'm on all platforms just like Locked On Louisville. You can find me wherever Locked On Louisville is on all those platforms as well.
Search up Locked On Louisville, search up Locked On Pitt, but also as well, I'd be remiss if I didn't have a Locked On crossover with another ACC school for the first time this season without giving a shout out to Locked On ACC, hosted by Candace Cooper. Be sure to check out that podcast as well. It does a great job of covering the Atlantic Coast Conference landscape as a whole. But as far as this crossover goes, that's going to wrap up this Thursday edition of this Locked On Crossover Thursday podcast. Everyone have a great day. We'll see you right back here on the respective shows tomorrow.